Tyrion Lannister never fired that fateful crossbow bolt into his father's heart. In that darkest hour, crossbow in hand, tears in his eyes, he chose a different path. Standing in the dim torchlight of the privy, Tyrion stared at Tywin, whose calm, cold eyes reflected the flickering flames. Tyrion's heart pounded in his chest as he tried to steady his breathing. The smell of smoke mingled with the faint stench that always accompanied the place, heightening his sense of disorientation. Yet something in him refused to pull the trigger, some deep-rooted agony that demanded a different kind of reckoning. For once, fury was not enough. He lowered the crossbow inch by agonizing inch until the tension in the string began to subside. His father watched him with eyes that betrayed neither relief nor fear. In that moment, Tyrion felt the weight of a lifetime of scorn. He saw the echoes of every hateful word Tywin had uttered, every condescending glance, every humiliation. He thought of Shay, of how Tywin had taken her, used her, twisted the knife in Tyrion's heart. Everything in him demanded retribution. But in that crucial instant, the gentler voice within, the one that had loved books and jokes and the sweet company of good wine, told him to walk away. He felt that if he killed Tywin, there would be nothing left of himself, only a shell filled with bitterness. Still, if Tyrion did not kill Tywin, what else could he do? He weighed his options in a heartbeat. Fleeing King's Landing was inevitable. He could not remain in the city after the injustice of his trial and the judgment that named him guilty of poisoning King Joffrey. Fleeing was a necessity, but perhaps he did not need to stain his hands with patricide. And so Tyrion turned his back, leaving Tywin alive on that seat of ignominy, crossbow lowered but not fired. With no glance over his shoulder, Tyrion disappeared into the maze of corridors, quietly descending into the bowels of the Red Keep, guided by Varys's whispered instructions. Tywin, for a rare moment, sat in stunned silence. When he finally stood up, adjusting the disheveled folds of his robe, a flicker of uncertainty passed across his proud face. Tywin Lannister was not a man accustomed to feeling the brush of mortality. And as he stood there, he realized how close death had come. The faint tremor that briefly possessed his fingertips infuriated him. He was Tywin Lannister, Warden of the West, father of the realm's wealthiest family, the King's Hand, and the architect of so many triumphs. He would not be undone by a second's hesitation. Anger flooded Tywin's veins. He hurried to compose himself, summoning what remained of his dignity. He was alive, and that changed everything. Before anyone could know of this near betrayal, before the rumors could swirl that he had been found in such a humiliating position, he would deal with the consequences. His first thought was to send out men to catch Tyrion immediately, but the shame he felt for nearly being killed in the privy kept him from an immediate public mobilization. It would not be good for the story to spread among the common people. The moment needed to be handled quietly and precisely. Meanwhile, Tyrion wound his way down stairwells, along dark corridors, and finally through a hidden passage that led to the docks below the Red Keep. Varys stood there, face grave and half-lit by the single lantern in his hand. He noted the crossbow still in Tyrion's grip. He expected it to be unused, for he had placed enough trust in Tyrion's love for his family, soured as it was, to guess he might not go through with murder. Or perhaps the spider simply accounted for all contingencies. Silently, Varys directed Tyrion into a small boat, which rocked gently in the black water. They sailed in near silence. Tyrion's thoughts churned. He looked back at the city rising on the hill, the high walls and spires where once he believed he could find some measure of respect. He felt numb, as though part of his soul had been left behind in that privy. But at least he had not become a kinslayer. Even in the chaos of his feelings, Tyrion took a small comfort in that. He hated Tywin, but not enough to become the thing that would eternally curse him. Under the cloak of night, the ship that Varys had arranged awaited Tyrion. The crew, well-paid and tight-lipped, said nothing about their secret passenger. Tyrion boarded, stumbling as the planks swayed beneath his feet. Varys lingered on the dock for a moment, his soft, watchful eyes taking in the broken figure Tyrion cut. There would be whispers in the days to come. The spider always knew how to navigate them. But for now, there was only a hushed farewell. Tyrion did not even realize he was crying until the wind stung his cheeks, drying the tears he could not recall shedding. The small ship slipped away into Blackwater Bay, turning north to avoid detection by any watchers on the royal galleys. Tyrion clutched the crossbow, though it was now more a burden than a weapon. He thought about throwing it into the sea, but found himself unable to let it go. He passed the first hours staring at the waves, his mind swirling with unanswered questions. He had just let Tywin live. Had that been cowardice, mercy, or something else? If Tywin had survived, what would happen next in King's Landing, in the Seven Kingdoms? Tyrion could scarcely guess. Back in the Red Keep, Tywin Lannister emerged from the privy with a mask of composure. His immediate intention was to maintain the illusion that nothing unusual had happened. No one must learn he had been vulnerable before Tyrion, indeed that he had nearly died. His first priority was to ensure that any trace of Tyrion was erased, that his escape was thoroughly covered. If anyone knew Tyrion got away, the scandal would inevitably lead to humiliating questions. Tywin summoned a small cadre of men he trusted, his personal guard, who had proven their loyalty countless times. In hushed tones, Tywin gave them orders to capture Tyrion discreetly if it was still possible, but not to spread word of it in the city. He also demanded absolute secrecy about the circumstances. These men, veterans of Tywin's harsh discipline, only nodded and departed. Of course, the moment they left, Tywin began to consider how he might shape the narrative. The city believed Tyrion guilty of regicide. If Tyrion was now at large, that posed a threat to the crown's legitimacy. It also threatened Tywin's personal authority. They would need to get ahead of the story, perhaps claim that Tyrion was killed while trying to flee the city. Time wore on that night, and Tywin, too restless to sleep, retreated to his solar. He dismissed the guards, wanting to be alone with his thoughts. A single candle guttered on his desk, illuminating the map of Westeros that he always kept spread there. His eyes flickered to the west, to Casterly Rock, and then down to King's Landing. He traced the sea route that a fugitive might take. Part of him was bristling with indignation that Tyrion had dared to raise a crossbow against him. Another part, one he barely acknowledged, felt relief that Tyrion had not pulled the trigger. To even think that was a kind of admission, Tywin banished the softness from his mind. In the following days, King's Landing was abuzz with news of Tyrion's disappearance. Rumors flourished, as they always did, thriving in the city's narrow alleys and busy wharves. Some said Tyrion had died in his cell. Others insisted he had flown away on a dragon. A few even claimed to have seen him riding off with a band of Sellswords under cover of darkness. Tywin let these rumors swirl, offering nothing concrete. He made certain to dispatch Lannister men along the major roads and into the city's seediest docks. They had orders to find any real trace of Tyrion and silence anyone who might have aided him. Across the capital, Queen Cersei seethed. Tyrion's disappearance was, to her mind, an intolerable embarrassment. She had wanted him executed. She had wanted to witness every moment of his downfall. Now he had slipped through her fingers. Her fury only grew when she realized her father was not telling her all he knew. She cornered Tywin in his study, demanding an explanation as to how Tyrion had escaped. Tywin replied with cool indifference that Tyrion had likely found some secret route from the dungeons, but that it mattered little. He would be hunted, found, and killed. Cersei's eyes burned with suspicion. Something felt off, but she could not pinpoint what. She retreated, promising Tywin that she would use her own resources to track Tyrion. Once in her chambers, she called upon Qyburn and her personal guard. She gave them instructions to find out everything they could about her brother's escape, using whatever means necessary. Her hatred of Tyrion, compounded by her sense of outrage, propelled her forward. Meanwhile, she did not yet realize that her father's life had been threatened at Crossbow Point. That would remain Tywin's secret, buried as best he could manage. Jaime learned of Tyrion's vanishing act from the gossips in the yard. He immediately confronted his father, confusion and worry in his eyes. He had helped Tyrion once, unlocked his cell in the dead of night, believing Tyrion's life was in danger. Now, if Tyrion had truly escaped, was that not cause for relief rather than condemnation? Jaime's relationship with Tywin had always been fraught, but he still found the courage to speak plainly. "My lord," Jaime said, "you must know something of Tyrion's escape. I unlocked his cell, yes, but I expected him to flee. Are you certain he's not still within the city?" Tywin's reply was cold, his face etched with disapproval. "You would do well not to speak of your treacherous brother. He has defied justice, fled from the punishment he deserved. If you had any hand in it, I will grant you leniency because you are my son. But do not test my patience, Jaime." Jaime's jaw clenched. There was an invisible wall between them, built from secrets, half-truths, and fatherly disdain. Jaime left the conversation more troubled than before. He did not mention the discovery of Shae's strangled corpse, nor did Tywin bring it up. The entire matter was a nest of serpents. Jaime tried not to dwell on his father's obvious willingness to ignore certain facts about Tyrion's flight. The more he thought about it, the more he suspected that Tywin had come close to something far more humiliating than a mere escape. But Jaime had no proof. Far out on the narrow sea, Tyrion's ship made slow progress. He kept to his cabin, burdened by sorrow and an ever-present swirl of guilt. Shae's death haunted him. Even though Tywin's betrayal loomed as the main reason, Tyrion felt the weight of his own regrets. He had not protected her well enough, had not foreseen how cruelly the Lannisters could twist everything. For hours, he would stare at the crossbow, silently condemning himself for the twisted path his life had taken. But no matter how much his heart ached, he found himself incapable of turning back. This was a one-way voyage. When the ship made landfall at a small port, Tyrion finally stepped onto foreign soil. The air smelled different, briny but with a spice he couldn't place. The locals spoke a language he barely understood. If all had gone to Varys' plan, Tyrion was to find refuge in Pentos, under the watch of Illyrio Mopatis. And indeed, after a few days of uneasy travel by wagon, he arrived at the opulent manse of Illyrio, the wealthy magister who had helped orchestrate many secret dealings across the narrow sea. Illyrio greeted him with flowery words of sympathy and respect, but Tyrion trusted none of it. Illyrio offered Tyrion a place to rest, fine foods, and more wine than Tyrion could drink in a lifetime. But with every courtesy, Tyrion saw the glint of cunning behind Illyrio's jolly exterior. He knew he was a piece on the board, a valuable piece perhaps, but still just a tool for greater designs. Tyrion accepted the hospitality for lack of alternatives. He had nowhere else to go, no illusions about the life that awaited him. If King's Landing had branded him a regicide and a fugitive, so be it. He would carve out what existence he could in exile. At least he had avoided kinslaying. Yet the guilt never left him. He replayed the final moments with Shae, the hatred in her eyes. He thought of Tywin sitting there, calm and unyielding. Tyrion had spat out so many hateful words to his father, culminating in a near murder. And now, Tywin would remain in power, shaping the realm's destiny. Sometimes Tyrion would dream of King's Landing in flames, or of crossbow bolts raining down on Tywin. But reality was more complicated. Tyrion was alive, but powerless, half a world away. In the weeks following Tyrion's escape, Tywin tightened his grip on the capital. With Mace Tyrell's support, he bolstered the crown's armies and started maneuvering politically to ensure the Lannister name remained paramount. He attended council sessions with the king, Tommen, who was young and pliable. Tywin effectively ruled the realm, ensuring that any dissenters were quickly silenced or bought off. He masked all traces of vulnerability, orchestrating feasts to celebrate the end of the Tyrion fiasco, claiming that justice had been served and that the crown was secure. Only a select few knew the deeper truth. Varys, from the shadows, watched how Tywin used the situation. The spider allowed the official version to stand. Tyrion had escaped, was wanted for regicide, and would be killed on sight should he reappear in Westeros. Varys was a master of secrets, and he had little difficulty manipulating the small folk's imagination with ghost stories and half-lies. all to keep Tyrion's whereabouts fuzzy. After all, Varys had his own reasons for wanting Tyrion alive. The realm needed clever men who could see beyond the petty rivalries of lords and ladies. But he, too, kept his counsel, for knowledge was power. Cersei drank more these days, haunted by the thought that Tyrion might one day return to exact vengeance. She hated him with a singular passion. She also seethed at her father's refusal to admit any failing in allowing Tyrion to slip away. Yet for the moment, she had bigger worries. The Tyrells, who were gaining influence as Marjorie grew closer to young King Tommen, and the many swirling rumors about her own relationship with Jaime. She also sensed that Tywin was planning something significant for the realm. A new alliance or an old betrayal? She was never sure. Her father was distant and impenetrable, even more so than usual. She tried to glean information from him, but met only curt refusals. Jaime, for his part, wrestled with his conscience. Though he had freed Tyrion, he had not foreseen the chaos that would follow. He wondered if perhaps Tyrion would have been safer to remain locked up, to stand trial. Of course, that trial was a sham. Tyrion stood no chance of fairness in King's Landing. Jaime took little satisfaction in saving Tyrion's life only for Tyrion to vanish into the unknown. Perhaps Jaime thought he should have helped Tyrion more, given him gold, made a real plan. Yet all these reflections led nowhere. Jaime had never been skilled in the realm of intrigue. He was a knight, a swordsman, someone who thought best in direct action. The complexities of politics left him uneasy. Time slid by like a blade through silk. In Pentos, Tyrion grew restless under Illyrio's watchful hospitality. The Magister flattered him with banquets, introduced him to exotic entertainers, even offered him slaves, though Tyrion vehemently refused such gifts. Tyrion drank, but found no solace at the bottom of his cups. At night, he would wander the garden of Illyrio's manse, listening to the nightingales. Sometimes he would speak with Illyrio about the broader world. The rumors that Daenerys Targaryen had raised dragons in Slaver's Bay, that mercenaries roamed the Dothraki Sea, that the free cities were always at each other's throats for trade routes and contracts. Eventually, Illyrio broached the subject that Tyrion sensed had been looming from the beginning. "My dear friend," he said in his thick, jovial voice, "you have a certain value. Though you might see yourself as a disgraced exile, your name still carries weight. If you wish for a new purpose, I know someone who could use your talents. A queen, across the sea, who might listen to the counsel of a clever Lannister." Tyrion arched an eyebrow. "You speak of Daenerys Targaryen, no doubt. I have heard she has dragons, though I must confess I've never thought of myself as a dragon rider." Illyrio grinned, showing gold teeth. "Not a rider, no, but an advisor? A hand, perhaps? She is forging a new kingdom in Slaver's Bay, or so the rumors suggest. If you are done with your old life, maybe you can help her shape a new world." Tyrion sipped his wine, pondering. Part of him recoiled at the idea. He had no illusions about the Targaryen claim or the brutality of the War of the Five Kings. Still, the notion of aiding a distant monarch, possibly returning to Westeros one day with an army at his back, held a certain twisted appeal. If Tywin was shaping the Seven Kingdoms to his liking, perhaps Tyrion could shape them differently. He asked Illyrio for more details, but the Magister only smiled, promising more if Tyrion agreed to travel east. Late that night, Tyrion sat alone with his thoughts. Images of King's Landing, of Tywin's dispassionate stare, haunted him. He ran a hand over his face, feeling the bristles of an unkempt beard. He was not the man he used to be. He had always been called the Imp, looked down upon by family, but at least once he believed he could earn their respect. Now those illusions were ash. A sense of grim resolve stirred within him. If he could not kill Tywin, if he could not right every wrong, perhaps he could still find some meaning. Daenerys Targaryen, the mother of dragons, might be a means to that end. He would not kneel to her blindly, but he might at least see what she stood for. While Tyrion wrestled with that decision, Tywin continued to tighten his hold on the realm. He orchestrated an alliance with Dorne, inviting the Prince of Dorne to King's Landing for a private discussion. He promised the Lannister support for Dornish claims, so long as the Martells swore fealty to Tommen and recognized the Lannister supremacy on the council. Doran Martell, cautious and cunning, weighed Tywin's offer carefully. He still smoldered over the deaths of his sister Elia and her children during Robert's rebellion. But he also recognized that an open rebellion against the Iron Throne might be suicidal. So the Prince of Dorne wrote to Tywin, agreeing to terms, albeit with conditions that Tywin found reasonable. In the Reach, Margaery Tyrell continued to wrap Tommen around her finger, ensuring that the Tyrells maintained a strong position in King's Landing. This did not entirely please Tywin, who preferred absolute Lannister dominance. Yet he knew that the Tyrell alliance was essential to keep the realm stable in these fragile times. The Iron Bank of Bravos still whispered about the crown's debts. The remnants of Stannis Baratheon's forces lurked in the north. Balon Greyjoy still threatened the western coasts. Tywin's mind was a chessboard, and each threat was a piece to be maneuvered or taken. But overshadowing these concerns was the knowledge that Tyrion was alive somewhere, a rogue element that could upset Tywin's carefully laid plans. Tywin knew that Tyrion held secrets, possibly including details that could discredit Tywin or sow chaos in the realm's leadership. Tyrion might even undermine the story of how Joffrey died. Though the official line was that Tyrion killed him, the truth was more complex. Littlefinger and Olenna Tyrell had orchestrated the poisoning, but none dared speak of it. If Tyrion told the world another version of events, it could cause untold complications. Tywin reasoned that Tyrion might attempt to gather allies overseas. That line of thought soon led him to recall Daenerys Targaryen. He had heard rumors of her conquests in Slaver's Bay, her dragons that grew larger by the day. He wondered if Tyrion was enough of a gambler to align with such a distant threat. In private, Tywin began quietly funding certain spies in Essos. Gold travels easily across the sea, and Tywin had plenty of it. He wanted eyes in the free cities, men and women, who could keep track of rumors about a dwarf with mismatched eyes and a sharp tongue. These watchers would file reports back to King's Landing, ensuring that Tywin had advance notice of any potential trouble. He would be ready if Tyrion aligned with Daenerys or any other pretender. Tywin was not a man who believed in fate. He believed in preparation. Cersei, too, sensed that her father was planning something, though he revealed little to her. This deepened the rift between them. She vented her frustrations by indulging in more wine, to the point that rumors began swirling about the Queen Regent's drunken outbursts, that only made her clamp down harder, snapping at anyone who dared cross her. Jaime tried to talk sense into her, but she dismissed him, calling him a traitor for helping Tyrion. "You let that monster go," she would sneer at him. "And now we're all doomed." Jaime felt the sting of those words. There was a time he had shared everything with Cersei, but that time seemed to slip further and further away. He found himself spending more hours drilling with the sword, though his sword hand was gone. He practiced his left-handed technique with grim determination, as though hoping to bury all his regrets with every clumsy thrust. He tried not to think about how precarious their family's position truly was. Far across the sea, Tyrion finally agreed to Illyrio's suggestion. A portion of him questioned Illyrio's motives. Why would the Magister care so much about reuniting a Lannister with a Targaryen? But in the end, Tyrion saw little else to do. He was not the type to rot in a foreign city, drowned in wine and self-pity. He boarded a river barge bound for the east, accompanied by a band of Illyrio's guards and a couple of discreet companions. The journey would take him along the great inland waterways, eventually leading to the lands bordering Slaver's Bay, where he might find Daenerys Targaryen if she still held Meereen. The barge glided through muddy waters, passing villages and small towns. Tyrion stared at the passing scenery, so different from Westeros. The architecture, the fields, the people, everything was tinged with newness. Yet Tyrion could not shake the sense of being haunted by his past. He dreaded the day he might have to stand face to face with his father again, and he knew Tywin would never cease hunting him. The Lannisters did not allow grudges to die. During quiet evenings on the barge, Tyrion conversed with a sellsword from the Stormlands who had traveled across the sea after losing everything in the war. The man was rough around the edges, but he spoke with a certain honesty that Tyrion found refreshing. They traded stories of battle, of lost love, of betrayal. Tyrion did not reveal his identity outright, though the man likely guessed. After all, dwarfs with cunning wits were not so common. Regardless, the Sellsword never pried too deep. He seemed content to drink and pass the time with idle talk. Eventually, the conversation turned to the state of Westeros. The Sellsword asked if Tyrion believed the realm would ever know peace. Tyrion laughed bitterly. Peace is a fancy shawl for the wealthy to wear at feasts, while the small folk starve all the same, he said. Though I suppose a stable ruler might do some good. But in my experience, the people who claw their way to the top seldom care about the cost of their climb. His words echoed in his mind long after he had spoken them. They reminded him of Tywin, the father who had shaped Westeros in his image, caring more for the family name than for any fleeting notion of mercy. Tyrion wondered if Daenerys would be any different. Part of him doubted it. Yet curiosity and a grim sense of opportunity drove him onward. Meanwhile, in King's Landing, Tywin orchestrated a grand tourney in celebration of King Tommen's name day. Knights from across the realm arrived to tilt at the lists. Streets overflowed with revelers, and merchants seized the occasion to hawk their wares at exorbitant prices. The city, still recovering from the purple wedding fiasco, was eager for a distraction. Tywin used this moment to strengthen alliances, inviting lords great and small to feast with him, to sample the Lannister hospitality and reaffirm their oaths of loyalty. During the festivities, Oberyn Martell was absent, having perished in a trial by combat some weeks before Tyrion's trial. But Doran Martell's heir, Quentyn, made a subdued appearance. He spoke politely to Tywin, but there was an underlying tension. The Martells had not forgiven or forgotten, but they played the game for now, eyeing any chance to strike. Tywin knew better than to trust them fully. He offered Quentyn a place of honor at the feast, but kept a careful watch on the young Dornish prince. Cersei drifted through the feasts and balls, her smile false and brittle. She could not banish the memory of Tyrion's cunning grin, imagining that somewhere he was laughing at her. She drank more than usual, snapping at servants and ignoring Tommen's plaintive calls for her attention. Margaery Tyrell took the opportunity to step in and play the gracious queenly figure, comforting Tommen when he was frightened by the boisterous knights or lost in the crowd. Many in the court murmured that the queen regent seemed distracted, while the young queen consort was blooming into her role. The whispers reached Tywin's ears. He confronted Cersei privately, ordering her to moderate her wine and behave with the dignity of a Lannister. She retorted angrily, "If you had not let Tyrion slip away, I might have had fewer nightmares." Tywin's jaw tightened, a flicker of emotion crossing his face, but he remained composed. "He will be dealt with in time," he said. "Refrain from speaking of him in public. We cannot show the realm any weakness." Cersei sneered. "You speak as though we're not bleeding power by the day. The Tyrells encroach. Dorne sees. The Iron Bank threatens. And you think ignoring Tyrion will make him go away? He's out there, father, plotting." Tywin said nothing, but his silence spoke volumes. He had no intention of ignoring Tyrion. Gold would flow to Essos in bribes and spies. If Tyrion so much as sneezed in Pentos, Tywin planned to know about it. One day he would have his vengeance, quiet, thorough, and final. In a quiet moment at the manse in Pentos, Illyrio took counsel with Varys, who had traveled discreetly across the sea. They spoke behind closed doors, their voices hushed. Illyrio detailed Tyrion's eastward journey, and Varys listened intently. The spider had his own web to spin, ensuring that the powers in Westeros remained in delicate balance. He believed that Tyrion's presence in Daenerys' camp might serve a greater cause, might be the missing piece in a puzzle of prophecy and politics that Varys had studied for years. "Will you inform Tywin of Tyrion's direction?" Illyrio asked quietly, a half-smirk on his thick lips. Varys shook his head. "No, not yet. Tywin invests great sums in obtaining knowledge, but knowledge withheld is often more valuable than knowledge given. Tyrion's path may lead to something far more interesting than a quiet death." Illyrio nodded in understanding. And in the meantime, we let Tywin believe he has control. Varys smiled without warmth. Indeed, let him believe what he will. The real game is only beginning. That real game began to take shape as Tyrion's barge reached the outskirts of Volantis. The ancient city sprawled along the mouth of the Rhoyne, a place of towering walls and bustling slave markets. Tyrion disembarked, both appalled and fascinated by the sheer scale of slavery on display. He saw men and women in chains, children branded with tattoos on their cheeks, lines of the downtrodden shuffling behind cruel overseers. It reminded him how differently the world was shaped beyond Westeros. He found a modest inn to rest in while the barge resupplied. Late that night, a hooded stranger approached him as he sat in a corner of the common room, half drunk on local wine. The stranger spoke Tyrion's name softly, in the common tongue, and asked if he might sit. Tyrion's mind raced, suspecting a trap, but curiosity held him in place. He nodded, inviting the stranger to join him. From beneath the hood, a woman's voice emerged, low and measured. She said her name was Marisa, though Tyrion guessed it was an alias. She revealed that she worked for an information broker who had taken a keen interest in his journey. "Your father's gold finds many purses," she said, "but not every purse is for sale." She smiled faintly, then added, "Some men of influence believe you might turn the tide in Slaver's Bay." Tyrion eyed her warily, unsure if she was friend or foe. "Information broker? That sounds like a polite way of saying spy." She shrugged. "We all serve someone, but perhaps there are those who wish to see Westeros free of the Lannister yoke." Tyrion leaned back in his chair, swirling the wine in his cup. "If you think I'm in a position to overthrow Tywin Lannister, you clearly overestimate me." Marisa's dark eyes glimmered in the lantern light. "Perhaps, or perhaps you don't yet realize what you can do. There is a Targaryen girl with 3 dragons, after all. And you are, if nothing else, a man who knows how to navigate the games of power." Tyrion frowned, choosing his words carefully. "Even if I advise her, it won't erase the fact that Tywin commands the entire realm's loyalty, with the crown in his pocket. She'd need more than dragons. She'd need ships, armies, and alliances. She'd need the lords of Westeros to turn against the Lannisters." Marisa's lips curved in a slight smile. "That is not impossible, Lord Tyrion, if she can offer them something better, and if you can prove yourself useful in forging those connections." He exhaled, a mix of bitterness and intrigue swirling within him. "You speak as if I have a stake in seeing Tywin dethroned. Perhaps I do, but not for any noble reason." She watched him quietly. "Vengeance is motivation enough sometimes, but so is survival. Your father wants you dead, my lord. If you join Daenerys, you might find more than just sanctuary." Tyrion said nothing for a moment, letting the silence thicken. Then he raised his cup in a mocking toast. "To new allies, then, and new devils to dance with." He downed the sour wine, feeling its warmth spread through him. Marisa departed as swiftly as she came, leaving Tyrion with more questions. But her presence confirmed what he suspected. Word of his journey was already leaking. Tywin's gold had reached into Volantis, but so had other factions, some of whom wanted to see the Lion's might toppled. Tyrion's arrival in Daenerys's camp would not be a secret for long. The next morning, Tyrion resumed his travel, heading further east along the well-worn routes that led toward Meereen. He studied maps provided by Illyrio, seeking the best path forward. The journey would be fraught with dangers: slavers, brigands, Dothraki hordes. He had only a small retinue for protection, and he was not a warrior. But Tyrion was determined to see it through. Perhaps, in the service of this new queen, he might find a purpose, or at least an interesting way to die. Meanwhile, back in King's Landing, Tywin continued to consolidate his power. If there was any fear in him about Tyrion's next moves, he showed no sign of it. He quietly received reports from his informants, though none had yet located Tyrion. Day by day, Tywin shaped the realm's policies. He increased taxes on trade from Dorne, enraging the Martells. He placed Lannister loyalists in key positions within the City Watch, ensuring that if any unrest erupted, it could be quelled swiftly. He also pressed the crown's bannermen to deliver more men to King's Landing, building a force that could be deployed if war threatened again. The small folk grumbled under heavier taxes and the rising prices of bread. The war had ravaged many farmlands, and though the fighting had ended, the recovery was slow. Tywin saw these hardships merely as necessary burdens for the realm. The Iron Throne's debts to the Iron Bank loomed like a specter. Squeezing the small folk was, in his mind, a regrettable but unavoidable measure. A kingdom without a strong treasury was ripe for conquest, and Tywin Lannister refused to be conquered by anyone. Cersei indulged in one petty revenge after another, punishing minor lords who she suspected of harboring Tyrion sentiments, undermining Marjorie's charitable endeavors at the orphanages, even cutting off certain supplies to the faith militant, who had begun to resurge after the war. She yearned to rid herself of all potential threats, but Tywin counseled restraint. Although the faith was growing in influence, he believed it could be pacified with the correct gestures. The last thing the crown needed was open conflict with the High Sparrow. Yet the seeds of chaos had been sown. The faith, outraged by the moral decay they perceived in the capital, began preaching more fervently against the sins of the monarchy. Commoners gathered around the September of Baelor to hear the words of the devout, who criticized the lavishness of the Lannisters and the rumored incest of Cersei and Jaime. Tywin's grip was firm, but public opinion was slowly turning. Whispers spread that the Lannisters were an abomination, that they had broken sacred laws by dethroning the Targaryens and committing all manner of atrocities during the war. In the Red Keep, Jaime continued to train diligently, pushing his left-handed swordsmanship beyond what most would consider possible. He was no longer the fabled swordsman he had been, but he was improving. Late at night, he would walk the corridors, sometimes passing the chamber that had once belonged to Tyrion. He would pause outside that door, remembering the nights they spent together as boys, telling each other stories, forging a bond that had frayed over time. He felt a pang of guilt for not doing more to protect Tyrion. Yet part of him was relieved that Tyrion had escaped King's Landing. At least he was not rotting in a cell, awaiting an unjust execution. Far from these tensions, Tyrion's journey brought him closer to Slaver's Bay. He began to hear more concrete stories of Daenerys Targaryen, how she had freed the slaves in Astapor and Yunkai, how she had conquered Meereen, but was struggling to maintain control. Rumors spoke of her dragons, once small as cats, now large enough to carry men on their backs, though whether she had done so remained unconfirmed. Other rumors claimed that one of her dragons had gone rogue, terrorizing the countryside and devouring goats and children alike. Tyrion took these tales with a grain of salt, aware of how stories could grow in the telling. Still, the more he heard, the more he realized Daenerys was no mere pretender. She was a power to be reckoned with. Then one sweltering afternoon, as Tyrion's party was encamped beside a shallow river, a trio of mounted figures emerged from the east. They wore dusty robes and carried curved blades. The guards in Tyrion's retinue tensed, preparing for a fight. But these newcomers did not attack. Instead, they called out in a language Tyrion didn't understand. One of Illyrio's men recognized it as Giscari, the tongue of the old slaver cities. Warily, they allowed the riders to approach. It turned out these riders were scouts from a local Sellsword company, the Stormcrows, who were patrolling the region on Daenerys' orders. They questioned Tyrion's group at length, demanding to know their business in the region and hinting that all foreigners needed permission from the Queen of Meereen to pass freely. Tyrion, after some haggling and a bit of gold, managed to convince them that he sought only an audience with Daenerys. The scouts seemed intrigued that a dwarf from Westeros would come so far. They warned that the path ahead was filled with dangers: rebellious slavers, rebel groups opposed to Daenerys, and roving bands of outlaws. A day later, another patrol arrived, this one led by a gruff man called Daario Naharis. Tyrion recognized the name from whispers. Daario was rumored to be Daenerys' lover, a brash and flamboyant warrior who had once commanded the Second Sons. Daario appraised Tyrion with a roguish smile, offering no immediate friendship but no hostility either. He took Tyrion's measure in a single sweep of those bright eyes. "So you're the imp of House Lannister?" Dario said in the common tongue. The one accused of killing a king. Tyrion bowed with mock gallantry. Indeed, though I disclaim the accuracy of that accusation. But I've killed enough men that it hardly matters. Dario laughed, amused. Queen Daenerys has had her fill of liars and flatterers. If you've come to kneel, you might find you have competition. Tyrion gave a crooked smile. Kneeling is not my style. Perhaps we can come to some other arrangement. Dario's grin broadened. We'll see. For now, you'll come to Meereen. I'll present you to the queen. Best behavior, if you please. Thus began the final leg of Tyrion's journey, escorted by Dario's men. The air grew hotter, the landscape more barren. They passed columns of freedmen, ragged and hopeful, carrying their meager belongings toward the fabled city of Meereen where the breaker of chains ruled. Tyrion saw signs of devastation, burned-out villas once owned by slavers, crucifixes bearing the remains of those who defied Daenerys. It was a land in upheaval, a clash between old ways and new. Tyrion suspected Daenerys's rule was more fragile than the tales suggested. Liberation was a noble cause, but sustaining it was another matter entirely. Finally, Meereen's walls rose from the horizon, towering above the plains. Beyond them, Tyrion could see pyramids of pale sandstone, streets winding beneath the scorching sun, and the great fighting pits that had recently been reopened, if rumors were true. His heart pounded, not with fear, but with anticipation. He was about to meet the mother of dragons, the woman who might upend the world as he knew it. And perhaps in serving her, he might discover a path to undermine Tywin, or at least carve out a new destiny for himself. As the gates opened to admit them, Tyrion caught a glimpse of the city's architecture up close. High walls adorned with stylized harpy statues, broad avenues lined with date palms, public fountains where children splashed to cool themselves. He also smelled the stench of neglect, garbage, waste, and the unwashed bodies of thousands who had once been slaves, suddenly freed but struggling to survive. Tyrion thought back to the small folk in King's Landing, who also suffered under heavy taxes and the aftereffects of war. The shape of oppression changed from one side of the world to the other, but the suffering felt eerily similar. Dario led Tyrion through the teeming streets, cutting a path with the authority of a favored captain. Men and women in simple garb parted before them. Tyrion noticed sullen faces and occasional gestures of respect or fear aimed at Dario and his men. Whispers followed in their wake, for the presence of a dwarf from Westeros was an oddity. In time, they reached a large pyramid flanked by braziers that belched thick smoke into the hot air. Guards wearing the sigils of the queen stood at the entrance, spears in hand. Dario spoke briefly with them before turning to Tyrion. "Wait here," Dario said. "The queen has to be informed of your arrival. I suggest you think carefully about your first words to her." Tyrion nodded. He waited under the watchful eyes of the unsullied, eunuch soldiers known for their discipline. He could see the hollowness in their gaze, the mechanical way they held their spears. They reminded him of 1,000 suits of armor, all empty inside. Time dragged, sweat beading on Tyrion's brow. At last, Dario returned, his expression unreadable. "She'll see you," Dario said. "Follow me." Ascending the pyramid's interior felt like climbing into a furnace. Tyrion's breathing grew labored by the time they reached the upper levels, though Dario showed no sign of strain. Tyrion cursed inwardly, wishing for the breezy halls of Casterly Rock, though that was a memory tainted by the knowledge of who waited there. At length they arrived at a grand chamber, open to the sky on one side. Marble floors reflected the glaring sunlight. At the far end stood a raised platform, upon which a simple throne was set. Daenerys Targaryen sat upon that throne. She was younger than Tyrion imagined, but there was a regal bearing to her posture. Silver gold hair framed a face that might have been carved from porcelain, yet her eyes held a hardness that spoke of trials faced and enemies overcome. She wore a pale linen dress suited to the heat, and around her swirled a faint aura of tension. 2 dragons, smaller than the monstrous one rumored to roam free, lounged nearby, their reptilian eyes fixed on newcomers. The faint smell of sulfur tinged the air. Dario bowed. Tyrion, with a theatrical flourish, lowered himself as best he could without toppling over. A hush fell. The Queen of Meereen considered Tyrion with silent intensity, as though trying to decide if he was a threat, a tool, or something else. After a moment that felt like an eternity, she spoke in the common tongue. "You are Tyrion Lannister," she said. "Slayer of kings, accused regicide, once hand of the king. My advisors tell me you've come a long way." Tyrion rose slightly, meeting her gaze. "I have your grace, and I've come because I believe we may be of use to one another." A flicker of emotion passed over Daenerys' face. Curiosity, perhaps. "And how might a Lannister be of use to me?" Tyrion exhaled, gathering his thoughts. He felt as though he stood on the edge of a precipice. "I bring knowledge of Westeros, its lords, its secrets. My father is Tywin Lannister, the most powerful man in the Seven Kingdoms. If you intend to sit the Iron Throne, you will have to face him eventually." He paused, letting the import of his words settle. "I can help you do that, because as it happens, my father and I don't quite see eye to eye." Daenerys studied him carefully, as though weighing his soul. At last she spoke. "I've heard enough talk from men who claimed they could help me. I let some stay, sent others away, and fed a few to my children. Which one will you be?" Tyrion managed a faint smile. "I pray I won't be dinner." A curious silence followed. Then Daenerys leaned forward. "We shall see, Tyrion Lannister. I will hear your counsel. But if I catch even a whiff of betrayal, you will learn what Dragonfire truly is." Tyrion bowed again, feeling an odd mixture of relief and trepidation. Here was a queen who wielded dragons, who had the potential to overturn the entire balance of power in Westeros. And now he was at her side, or at least near it, while his father sat the Iron Throne side back in King's Landing, forging alliances and illusions of permanence. Tyrion wondered if, somewhere across the sea, Tywin felt a shiver of foreboding. Probably not. The old lion believed himself invincible, but perhaps in time that belief would cost him. So it was that Tyrion Lannister began a new chapter, not as the kinslayer he might have become, but as an exiled son with a crossbow's worth of unspent rage. The days ahead would be shaped by the interplay of these forces. Tywin's iron grip on the crown, Cersei's festering hatred, Jaime's conflicted loyalties, and Daenerys' dragons clawing at the door of a realm rife with cracks. For all of Tywin's power, for all the gold and cunning he commanded, a single choice, Tyrion's choice to spare his father, had changed the rhythm of events. And though no one in King's Landing or Meereen or the Free Cities could yet know it, that one moment of mercy in the Red Keep's privy would echo throughout the ages, a hinge upon which the fate of empires might yet turn. And as Tyrion lay down that night in the modest chambers assigned to him within Meereen's Grand Pyramid, he found himself staring into the darkness, still clutching the memory of that crossbow he had carried so far. He had not killed Tywin, but he had not forgiven him either. He thought of the father who had loomed over his life like a vast and unyielding shadow, and he realized that perhaps the strangest revenge was yet to come, to stand against Tywin from across the sea, to advise the dragons that might one day reduce the Lannister pillars to rubble. Yet Tyrion also remembered the flicker of hesitation in his father's eyes, the moment he lowered the crossbow. He wondered if, by allowing Tywin to live, he had granted both of them the chance to fight this war on a grander stage, with more at stake than a single man's vengeance. For Tyrion knew that the game he had now entered was bigger than himself, bigger than House Lannister or the Seven Kingdoms. Dragons changed everything, and so did the tides of prophecy and rumor that Varys and Illyrio whispered about in their secret corners. If Daenerys Targaryen truly aimed to reclaim the Iron Throne, Tyrion would be at her side, shaping her strategy with the cunning he had once used to survive King's Landing. He wondered what Tywin was doing at that very moment. Likely attending some lavish feast or drafting edicts to enforce the crown's will. Perhaps, Tyrion mused, his father was lost in thought, recalling the moment his own son had nearly killed him. But then Tyrion dismissed that fancy. Tywin Lannister was not one to dwell on what could have happened. He would be focused entirely on ensuring that it never happened again. He would have set every spy and assassin on Tyrion's trail, though they might not catch him, not yet. Tyrion decided that if he ever returned to Westeros, it would not be as a fugitive creeping through dark alleys, but as part of a force that demanded the realm's attention. Daenerys Targaryen was that force. If she could hold her fractious new empire together, if her dragons continued to grow, if the great houses of Westeros could be swayed or coerced to her side. There were so many ifs. Tyrion had always been a gambler, though, and these odds did not deter him. Across the sea, Tywin's maneuvers continued apace. He corresponded with the Iron Bank, working out the details of a new loan to ensure the crown's debts did not crush the monarchy. He pressed forward with marriage pacts and trade agreements, all the while ensuring that the rumor of Tyrion's inevitable capture was repeated by his agents. In the corridors of the Red Keep, the word was that Tyrion might be rotting in some foreign dungeon or lying dead in a ditch, to be discovered by a merchant caravan. Tywin allowed such rumors to flourish, for it demoralized any who might sympathize with his son. He did not mention to anyone that he knew Tyrion was likely alive and scheming. Cersei, though, was less patient. She raged in private, haranguing her father for not finding Tyrion sooner. Tywin silenced her with a reminder that she, too, had miscalculated at times, letting her personal vendettas overshadow the good of the family. That barb stung Cersei deeply. She thought of Joffrey, her precious son, dead at his own wedding feast, and how Tyrion had taken the blame. She despised Tyrion as though he carried the poison in his veins. She sometimes woke in a cold sweat, dreaming that Tyrion would sail into the harbor with Sel's words, that he would appear at her door with a crossbow in hand. In Meereen, Tyrion struggled to find his footing among Daenerys' advisors. They did not trust him easily, nor he them. Missandei, the queen's interpreter, was polite but cautious. Grey Worm, the commander of the Unsullied, made no outward show of aggression, but Tyrion sensed the unswerving loyalty beneath that stoic exterior. Ser Barristan Selmy, an exiled Kingsguard who had served the Targaryens, and then Robert Baratheon, listened to Tyrion's words with an appraising gaze. Tyrion recognized the knight from King's Landing, though Ser Barristan had never paid him much mind before. "Lord Tyrion," Barristan said in their first private conversation, "I remember you as a clever man at court, but we must know where your loyalties truly lie. You are, after all, Tywin Lannister's son." Tyrion sighed. "My loyalties lie wherever I can survive best. And if you think that's with Tywin, you're mistaken. The man wants my head on a spike. If I have any loyalty to House Lannister left, it's a child's loyalty to the home that never really wanted him." Barristan studied him with a quiet sadness. "I served your father once when he was hand to King Aerys. He was a formidable man then. He is more formidable now. You do realize what you'll face if you stand against him?" Tyrion nodded. "Yes, I do." Word by word, conversation by conversation, Tyrion worked his way into Daenerys' confidence. He showed her how to read the shifting loyalties of Meereen's former slave masters, how to harness the freedman's desire for vengeance without letting it spill into chaos, how to manipulate the ambitions of the local Sel's-word companies. He had studied politics all his life, and Meereen, for all its exotic ways, still followed the basic principles of power. Respect was a brittle currency, easily lost and difficult to regain. Fear had its uses, but too much fear could lead to revolt. Daenerys saw the wisdom in his counsel. She listened, though she did not always agree. More than once, they argued in private over how to handle rebellious slavers or the demands of the freedmen. Tyrion warned against cruelty, recalling his father's iron-fisted approach that bred resentment across the realm. Daenerys sometimes insisted that the slavers deserved no mercy, that the freed needed to see justice done. It was a delicate balance, and Tyrion found himself occasionally exasperated. Yet he also recognized that she was not her father, the Mad King. She possessed a conscience, even if it was tempered by a fierce determination to hold what she had won. And so the city of Meereen slowly stabilized under Daenerys' rule, though threats continued to loom. The Sons of the Harpy staged assassinations in the night, daring the queen to retaliate. Noble houses that had once thrived on the slave trade plotted behind locked doors. dragons grew restless, caged or chained, though Tyrion marveled at their power from a cautious distance. He had never imagined seeing living dragons, let alone working alongside their mother. All the while, Tyrion thought of Tywin, weaving his webs in King's Landing. He thought of the day they might meet again, not in a privy with a crossbow, but on the battlefield of politics, perhaps an actual battlefield if Daenerys one day sailed west. He could almost hear Tywin's disdainful voice. "Is this what you choose, Tyrion? To align with a Targaryen girl, thinking you can unseat the Lannisters?" Tyrion would have no easy answers. Part of him knew that no matter how Daenerys' cause fared, Tywin would remain a monument of cunning and determination. Perhaps the realm itself would break before Tywin ever bent. But Tyrion also believed that if Daenerys truly united her forces, if she found the right allies in Westeros, the Lannisters might be vulnerable. The War of the Five Kings had left scars across the land, opened fissures that an ambitious queen could exploit. In the quiet of his small chamber within the pyramid, Tyrion lifted a goblet of wine to his lips. The windows were open to a starlit sky. He reflected on the strangeness of fate. A single crossbow bolt would have silenced Tywin forever, but he had lowered the weapon. By doing so, he had set into motion a series of events that led him here in Meereen, at the side of a Targaryen. The father lived, the son wandered. And in that wandering, the son discovered a cause, perhaps not one he loved wholeheartedly, but one that gave him a sense of direction. The weeks turned to months. Reports reached Meereen of events in Westeros. Winter was coming, said the merchants and sailors. The Riverlands were in shambles. The North locked in a grim struggle for power. The Ironborn still raided the coasts. Among these tidings came occasional rumors of Tywin Lannister's unstoppable rule, how King Tommen's reign was more stable by the day, how the Lannister gold was buying the loyalty of the realm, how the Tyrells were kept in check by carefully orchestrated maneuvers. Tyrion listened to these stories with a mix of envy and scorn, acknowledging that Tywin truly was the greatest political mind in Westeros. Yet Tywin had never faced dragons. One evening, Daenerys summoned Tyrion to a private audience. She stood on a balcony overlooking the city, where the wind carried the pungent scent of the slums mixed with the faint sweetness of date palms. "You have guided me well in ruling Meereen," she said, turning her gaze to Tyrion. "But you know that my true goal lies beyond this city. I was born to sit the Iron Throne. If I remain here, the best I can do is be a queen of ruins." Tyrion folded his hands, choosing his words carefully. "Meereen is your foothold. Abandoning it too soon could signal weakness. Yet staying here forever will not earn you the Seven Kingdoms. You need ships, soldiers, alliances, and you need to address the threat of your father's enemies, the usurpers who might strike once you sail away." Daenerys nodded, a thoughtful crease forming between her brows. "I will leave a council to govern Meereen, but I must move on. My dragons cannot be caged any longer. If I do not unite them under me, they'll tear this city apart or roam free and cause chaos." She paused, eyes drifting toward the dim shape of a distant dragon perched atop a distant tower. "You are from Westeros, Tyrion. Tell me, will the realm accept me? Or will I have to wage another war?" He considered. "There will be some who flock to you, especially if you can discredit the Lannisters and break their alliances. But others will stand by Tywin out of fear or loyalty. War is likely, though it may not be as all-consuming as the War of the Five Kings. Much depends on how you present yourself, and how effectively you can show that you are not the daughter of the Mad King in spirit." She looked at him sharply. "I am not my father." Tyrion bowed his head slightly. "I know, but the lords of Westeros will need to see that for themselves. And then there are the White Walkers, or so some rumors claim, darkness stirring in the far north. You may find that the living have bigger enemies than each other." Daenerys' expression flickered with uncertainty. "You speak of ancient legends. The living dead." Tyrion shrugged. "Legends, yes, but so were dragons until you hatched 3 of them. If these White Walkers are real, Westeros will need every ally it can get. Even a Targaryen queen with her brood might find them formidable." She absorbed his words in silence, the weight of destiny and doubt reflected in her violet eyes. At length she said, "We will see. If the dead are stirring, then living must unite or fall. In any case, my path is clear. I must sail for Westeros soon. Will you stand with me, Tyrion Lannister?" He met her gaze without flinching. "I will, your grace, not out of blind devotion, but because I believe you may be the best hope for a realm that has bled too long under rulers who see only their own power. And perhaps," he added softly, "because it will give me a chance to face my father on equal ground." Daenerys studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Very well, we shall prepare. The day is coming when dragons will cross the narrow sea again." Months later, in the hush before dawn, Daenerys led her forces from Myriene's harbor. A fleet of ships, purchased or seized from the slaver cities, bore her unsullied, her Dothraki, her freedmen, and her advisors across the waves. 3 dragons soared overhead, their shadows passing over the water below. Tyrion stood on the deck of one ship, clutching the railing, gazing westward. The salt wind whipped his hair. He felt a tremor of nerves and excitement. This was the gamble of a lifetime. To return to Westeros at the side of the Dragon Queen, to challenge Tywin Lannister's might. He had no illusions about how daunting that would be. In King's Landing, the news of Daenerys' departure from Meereen arrived via ravens and gossip, stirring the court into a frenzy. Tywin received the reports calmly, though a chill cut through his composure. He summoned the members of the small council and laid out plans for repelling a potential invasion. The Crown's navy was not large, but with the Redwyne fleet from the Reach and the Lannister ships from the west, he could muster a formidable force. He set watchers on the seas, commanded the building of new ships, demanded that all lords of the coastal regions stand ready to defend Westeros against the Targaryen threat. Cersei was less composed, descending into fits of rage at the thought of Tyrion arriving with a foreign queen. She demanded that Tywin dispatch assassins, sabotage the Targaryen fleet, poison Daenerys if possible. Tywin, who had likely considered those options already, explained that attempts had been made on Daenerys' life in the past, all unsuccessful. She had survived them, grown stronger. Her dragons were no longer hatchlings. Any new attempt would be extremely risky and might provoke the very invasion they sought to prevent. Jaime, watching all of this unfold, felt torn. He remembered his vow to the Mad King's father once, his oath to protect the realm. Now a Targaryen threatened to come again, and Jaime was caught in the middle, uncertain of who was right or wrong. Tywin assured him that the Targaryen line was madness incarnate, that the realm would fall into chaos if Daenerys took the throne. Yet Jaime had seen the destruction that followed Joffrey's cruelty, the bitter resentment that lingered under Lannister rule. He said little, keeping his doubts to himself, training with the sword as though preparing for an inevitable war. And so the board was set. Daenerys Targaryen sailed closer by the day, determined to reclaim her birthright. Tywin Lannister stood in the Red Keep, marshalling the forces of the Seven Kingdoms. Between them lay the sea and countless uncertainties, alliances that could shift in a blink, old grudges that could flare into rebellion, and winter creeping down from the north. Tyrion wondered if the snows had already fallen in the north, if the White Walkers were real, if a time might come when the living had to band together despite their feuds. For now, though, the immediate concern was the impending confrontation between dragon and lion. As the Targaryen fleet neared the coast of Dorne, where, surprisingly, some local lords seemed willing to allow them safe anchorage, Tyrion caught sight of the sweeping dunes and stony beaches that marked the southern tip of Westeros. He thought of the journeys he had taken, the horrors and heartbreaks that had led him to this moment. Once, he had been Tyrion of House Lannister, brother to Cersei and Jaime, scorned by his father, ridiculed for his stature. Now, he was an advisor to the Mother of Dragons, crossing the sea to face that same father, not in a moment of impulsive vengeance, but in a grand conflict that might reshape the world. He wondered if, in the end, he would regret not firing that crossbow. Perhaps it would have been simpler. Yet, as he stood there, the wind in his hair and the promise of something monumental before him, he realized that simplicity was never his destiny. Tyrion Lannister had chosen not to become a kinslayer, and in that act of mercy, cowardice, or principle, or some tangled combination, he had set these events in motion. Maybe, just maybe, he would have a chance to see the Lannister legacy turned on its head by fire and blood, by alliances forged in new circumstances, by a queen who believed she could break the wheel. He looked up as a dragon roared overhead, its wings blotting out the sun for an instant. Fear and awe warred in his gut. One day soon, that roar would echo over King's Landing, and Tywin would be forced to reckon with powers he could not fully control. Tyrion smiled grimly to himself, imagining his father's face when the dragons circled the Red Keep. Perhaps that alone was worth crossing an ocean for. Thus the ships pressed on, each wave bringing them closer to the fabled land of the Seven Kingdoms. And in King's Landing, Tywin Lannister stood unbowed, commanding his banners to rally at the capital's behest. Courtiers whispered of war, of prophecy, of an ancient house returning to reclaim its birthright. On the horizon, thunderheads gathered, and the swirling storms seemed to mirror the turmoil in men's hearts. The stage was set for a confrontation that would shape the fate of Westeros. Neither Tywin nor Tyrion knew precisely how it would end, but both felt the thrum of destiny beneath their feet. One believing he held the realm firmly in his fists, the other convinced that dragons might burn those fists to ash. Had Tyrion loosed that crossbow bolt, the realm would have been spared this clash, or at least it would have taken a different shape. But choice was the coin that mortals paid to the gods of fate. Tyrion had chosen mercy or something akin to it, and now the wheel turned, unstoppable, poised to crush or elevate them all. That night, as the Targaryen fleet rode the waves, Tyrion found a quiet corner to watch the moonlight dance upon the sea. Memories of that night in the Red Keep's privy returned unbidden. He recalled Tywin's face, the moment he lowered his aim, the heavy silence as he turned and walked away. He had no illusions that his father would show him any mercy, should they meet again. But perhaps, with a Targaryen queen and 3 dragons at his back, Tyrion wouldn't need Tywin's mercy. He breathed in the salt air, bracing himself for the battles to come. And far away, in the dark corridors of the Red Keep, Tywin lingered over war plans, never suspecting that the greatest threat he faced was not just the Targaryen claim, but his own son's mind and heart, honed by hatred and tempered by the choice to let him live. A single bolt left unfired had changed the course of history. Now, father and son barreled toward a reckoning that would either reshape the world or destroy it utterly. And in the hush of that starry night, Tyrion Lannister smiled at the thought, raising a silent toast to the uncertain dawn that waited just beyond the horizon.